mentorship and apprenticeships to get people trained over multiple years, as well as postdoc programs for R&D candidates. And then there needs to be a playbook to support organizations in defining and establishing a robust employee value proposition to keep people on the continent. And this is both in the manufacturing industry as well as in R&D. Has to be attractive to stay. We want to keep our best people, and we want to participate both continentally and globally in vaccine production and in creation of novel vaccines. And this is all dependent on funds for scholarships, intern stipends, apprenticeship sponsorships, but I think also not to forget to sponsor people to come and teach those degree programs that we need so badly. And while initiatives are being developed and implemented, there'll be a need to have external experts come in, expatriate talent and international partners to enable a fast tracking of these programs so that we're not having a slow start, but we want to hit the ground running. I have the next slide, please. So PAVM will create regional capability and capacity centers comprised of regional educational institutions and industry players. So there'll be a relationship between the educational institutions and industry and the research R&D centers, that there'll be input from the manufacturers, and there'll also be close links with the regulatory core, because this is also, as we keep stressing, very important in terms of establishing the manufacturing on the continent. So the coordination will be done centrally and will include the educational institutions and industry players. They will manage the program requirements, so the expectations surrounding internships, on-the-job development programs, and hires from adjacent industries, etc. They will act as a networking and communication platform. They will coordinate the funding for the programs, and they will track the needs across the whole ecosystem from end to end. And they will also be in a position to facilitate partnerships with international players. The capability and capacity centers will be located regionally and will include industry players across the manufacturing and research, and each will be affiliated with one of the regulatory cores. In order to participate in these CCCs and receive key benefits, all players must contribute to the continental strategy, which may require players to provide certain capabilities. So training in a certain technology or specific skills, and agree to work with all the other players across the full capability and capacity center. So no exclusive partnerships as one university and one factory and excluding everyone else, but across the whole continent. So I'm now going to hand over to the roundtable discussion. Dr. Mark Dowell is going to be facilitating the roundtable discussion. He's a professor from the Department of Medicine and Medical Center, the Center for Global Health and Impact, Georgetown University. And I think in Africa, he's much better known for his role in PEPFAR. So welcome.
Thanks very much, Dr. Williamson, and good afternoon to all. Very excited for this panel that will be engaged today based on the excellent presentation that was just given. The panel consists of Dr. Roger Glass, a friend for too many decades, who you all know is the director of the Fogarty International Center and Associate Director for International Research at NIH. Professor Pantaino Kalibo, who is the Executive Director of the Uganda Vaccine Research Institute, or VRI, from Entebbe. and Professor William Ampofo at the Ngugi Memorial Institute for Medical Research, College of Health Sciences, University of Ghana, and Dr. Matthew Downham, who's the lead sustainable manufacturer at CEPI. Based on the presentation and Pavi, the work Pavi is doing, why don't we start with Roger Roger and Matthew. Pavem's laid out quite a vision, an exciting vision. But of course, going from vision and ideas to implementation is always a bit of a challenge. So how is it going to be possible? And both of you are deeply involved. Roger, you've been working on training programs in Africa for decades, literally, and CEPI, of course, is getting involved. But how can we attract organizations, including research institutions, manufacturing facilities, to play the role in the capability and capacity centers that is needed as outlined? And what's the appetite for international players to support these centers, and who might some of those key players be? Why don't we start with Dr. Matthew Downham.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark, and I hope you can hear me okay. It's a pleasure to be on this panel, and thanks again to yourself and to the organisers for this opportunity today. I think, as we discussed a little earlier, there is considerable interest to support activities in Africa. There's a considerable number of development banks, independent financiers, organizations wishing to lend support and coordinate research and development, and also training. Training is very much recognized as core to any kind of future activities within the Africa region. And in fact, there can be certain lessons learned from the Serum Institute of India in terms of their focus on building up that workforce training exercise, largely before they even started their strategy to vaccine manufacture. So it's kind of something to be thought of really upfront as soon as possible. So it's taking that investment, that interest, and really beginning as soon as possible to try and underpin the training, the upskilling in key subject matter areas. Annalisa has mentioned already some of these areas, but certainly from what CEPI has been doing together with the COVAX Manufacturing Task Force, we've identified core areas of vaccinology, manufacture, GMP quality processes, which leads into release assays, quality assurance, and of course, regulatory affairs, as has already been mentioned. CEPI is very closely involved with the African Union, CDC, and PAVM through an MOU that was signed, April this year. And we are supporting the PAVM initiative to establish the strategy for building vaccine manufacturing, as well as training capability within the continent, within Africa. So there is, of course, that need not just to have that institutional recognition from international organizations, but that local, regional coordination and synchronization. Because if you think about it this way, if Africa is going to go from having this concept, this 1% of vaccines used in Africa are made in Africa, to close to 60% of vaccines used in Africa are made in Africa, there's going to have to be a considerable escalation in training and support of that initiative moving forwards. So as I mentioned, the COVAX Manufacturing Task Force, which was convened earlier this year by CEPI, WHO, UNICEF, Gavi, the Gates Foundation, IFPMA Bio, and DCVMN. Under Workstream 3, which is convened by the WHO, there are similar working groups to what PAVM has to focus on trying to establish capability and capacity centers, support training, technical transfer of capabilities and understanding. And I think also fundamental to all of this is something else that's been discussed in this session, the last one, and was raised in a comment earlier this morning as well, and that is how to address the potential future brain drain. There might be needs to have certain binding commitments that students who upskill, particularly in the core areas that are needed within Africa, have binding commitments that they cannot leave the country or the continent for an X period of time until those skills have been transitioned into a broader population, into a broader workforce. So there's a number of things that can happen here, and certainly CEPI is endeavouring to support them, not just from the training perspective, but the establishment of the African Medicines Agency, the upskilling of the regulatory needs to support all of the activities that lie in future, and trying to help fund as well. And I've mentioned some of that already today in terms of not just through the African Union, CDC and PAVM, but also through the institutionalization of the establishment rather of a vaccine manufacturing development network that also has a platform for training and supporting work skilling, upskilling as well moving forwards. So I'll stop there, and I hope that's sufficient for now, but there's going to be more discussion, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, and maybe if you could just expand a little bit for now, Matthew, on who you see the external partners being as key for support. Of course, the African Union has put forward a fantastic plan through PAVM, and there are many networks within Africa, but can you talk a little bit about who you think could provide external support? This is going to take millions of dollars over years. So who do you see coming to the table, and what can be done to energize them now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great question. So I can reference here, CEPI established an MOU with the World Bank IFC a little earlier this year. And core to that MOU is the coordination of funding to support Africa vaccine manufacturing capacity capability build. So within that MOU, there is infrastructure to support funding of training initiatives in Africa. The World Bank IFC is the only example. There are other development banks. The European Union has pledged considerable sums to this activity, and it's how to structure and organize that investment to support the universities, the infrastructure throughout Africa, to be able to take on students, to train people, build the courses, as Annalisa has kindly referenced already today, and moving that forwards. Now, commensurate and in parallel to that, will be needed establishment with universities, training courses, training facilities in other parts of the world to support the courses and the building of courses moving forwards. So there needs to be that recognition as well, that identification and building of those partnerships, those relationships with academic institutes to facilitate building the courses that will then become part of the process for upskilling workforces, the workforce in Africa moving forwards. So it's those two components, the funding and the academic.
Thank you, Matthew. Roger, that's a great lead into you. I'm rather jealous you're actually in Kigali. You're enjoying the beautiful city. You've been doing this now and been involved in training in Africa for quite some time. Be great to hear from you on your experience with that, how you think Fogarty could engage going forward, but maybe give a little bit of background on what Fogarty's done. And if you could talk a little bit about the retention issue, since that's come up a couple of times for the many Africans who have been trained, some of which might be on this call or in this meeting through Fogarty, how the retention's been in terms of people in Africa, in other parts of the world.
Sure, Mark. Thanks for the chance to talk to this group, speak with this group. We've had a long history of training, building partnerships between foreign African institutions around HIV and many other topics, but it really began with HIV. And it's been very successful. We've trained outstanding people who are researchers. The knowledge base has changed. The clinical trials have been done for most of the major prevention interventions, drug regimens and such. It's been a terrific program, and we've really established centers of excellence in the health sciences. That said, what haven't we done? And what could we do better? I see a real change in academic education, if you will, in the United States in three areas. One is that institutions, universities have often been siloed. So you have a medical school, which is independent of a law school, that's independent of an engineering school, and they rarely get together. The students are not trained between each other. And that's really been